picture the scene. You're in the IRA. You're getting your IRA on. You're planting explosives, bombs, anything that goes boom. You're planting it now in the sewers under London. Specifically, the sewers under the Parliament of the UK. And you have a purpose, which is to send a message to the British government that the reign of terror will no longer be tolerated. Now, out of everyone that could file your plan, do you think it would be this guy?
Yep, that's me. You're probably wondering how I ended up in this situation.
So, how did we end up here? How did we have a lot of IRA people in the sewers under London, which, isn't pure fantasy, but the seasoning on that little bit of reality is, of course, Spider-Man. Why is Spider-Man suddenly involved in the IRA's activities in London? Well, my friends, let's find out. So, as I noted before, the comic starts off in Heathrow Airport, and two Irish boys and a few others have decided to shoot up the place, essentially, and explode the place out. And Spider-Man and his mate Joy Mercado, and they're both from the newspaper that Peter works at, and they're here on a little job. They're here actually to document Margaret Thatcher's speech outside Parliament. But it wouldn't be a Margaret Thatcher speech outside of Parliament without the IRA deciding, you know what? We need some limelight as well. Hence this. Now, this is where the strangeness comes in. You just kind of think, okay, they're showing the IRA blowing stuff up, which is, it's truthful. It did happen, happened multiple times. Having Spider-Man here, a little bit strange. He sort of goes into this sort of inner monologue where he's like, innocent people are being hurt here. And of course, yeah, it's awful. There should be no loss of life ever. But there is this incessant need to almost kind of say, there's only one side of the story here, and that's it. And it's the British side of the story. So almost immediately, Peter Parker is like, it's time for Spider-Man to get into this situation. It's not complex enough. Let me insert myself into it. And he's a little bit worried about his secret identity. He doesn't want to just start swinging around the airport as Peter Parker. So he's in the storage room. He's putting his little web slingers on. And just outside the vent, we hear, "Up the rebels." So if you didn't get it at this point, you're kind of like, up the rebels. Now look, if you're an adult at this point, you kind of go, as soon as you see someone called Sean and Paddy with guns firing at British people in an airport, you're kind of like, oh, that's the IRA, I'm just going to close that over. Yep, I don't need to read any more of that. Thank you very much. I don't want to be reminded of what's going on. But if you're a child, then you're kind of like, you're a little bit confused. You recognize the name Sean and Paddy. Maybe your Uncle Sean or your Uncle Paddy went to England to look for work during this time period. Maybe they fought Spider-Man instead. Maybe looking for work was a lie. Maybe they were up to no good. And if you're really unsure, death to the Brits. I am a Maggie. You see, this is another issue as well. If you weren't sure they were Irish people, or Northern Irish people in this case, you kind of have to put a little bit of the Irish brogue on it, okay? So that's why they speak a bit funny. But anyway, if you weren't sure it was an IRA man, now you're definitely sure. So once obviously Spider-Man hears that Margaret Thatcher is soon to be hurt, he rolls into action. So the web comes out of the vent, gets the gun, he smacks the guy, knocks him unconscious, and he just runs outside back into to meet up with Joy. And it's here then that we get a little bit more backstory. And we find out that the guy with the gun screaming at them at the start in the panel to get down, to F off, go back to America, the usual stuff. His name was John Bartlett, and he's a top man at Scotland Yard. And he's been attending a United Nations conference on terrorism, which is very interesting because Ireland is part of the United Nations. So it's not a good situation for Ireland here. Presumably they will have to go back to the United Nations after this and explain to Magneto or, Professor Xavier or Captain America, whoever decides to turn up at the United Nations, and just say, your boy Spider-Man has created an international incident by getting involved. Now, obviously getting involved here involves, dicking around in the airport with the IRA. But this will eventually lead, at the end of this issue, to Spider-Man getting on a boat to Ireland to, for want of a better word, finish the job. But anyway, look, John Bartlett is working there with Margaret Thatcher. She has a big speech in Parliament tomorrow. This attack here was, or will be, a prelude to that attack. And now we find out exactly the name of the attackers. They are the Provos, members of the Provisional Wing of the Irish Republican Army. Now, the Provisional IRA were the IRA. There was a definite split as to why they existed and why the original IRA just became the government and the state army, essentially. Although I do technically take that they were a wing of the Irish Republican Army, at this point, it's not so much of a clear divide. And the comic does make it sound like these are sort of rogue agents from the normal IRA, which was not operating at that time. And we find out that 2 of them were killed, 1 was found unconscious, and the last, the leader, got away. So there you go. Automatically, a very strange incident has occurred here. We have the Provisional IRA attacking an airport and almost killing Spider-Man in the process. Just as I said earlier, Spider-Man does have these sort of inner monologues, like, how could people be so horrible? That sort of like it's a horror. I mean, first of all, it's fictional here, okay? But there was actual atrocities that did occur. But there's a certain amount of, I don't want to call it virtue signaling, but it's like hysterics from Peter Parker here. Now look, I'm not ragging on the dude. He's every reason to be upset with this situation. It's an awful situation. But there's a difference between being upset and pontificating from a sort of a ivory tower looking down on the situation, not knowing what the situation is. It has a little bit of the touch of the, woe is me, why is this happening? I can't believe this has happened. What the hell caused this? Very one-sided. You're not going to get much of the other side of the story, but when you do, and you're going to get it very shortly, you'll wish you never got the other side of the story. Now, among the victims is a 6-year-old girl. And, the guy's like, why do all the good ones die? And Peter's like, how'd you answer a question like that? It's on his mind a bit, There's a limo waiting for Peter and Joy. He feels a bit guilty because of all the pain and the horror back there. Joy is like, oh, I know what you mean. It's terrible. Especially when it's all based on a fear of Spain invading England. Now, at this point in the comic, if you're unaware, you would just go, bloody Spaniards. Bloody Spaniards and the Irish, up to no good. Can't they just leave the poor British people alone? Anyone else is just like, can you just come again? The Spain. Why have the Spanish been brought into this? And then, Joy is doing her usual cutesy pie thing. She's like, oh, I forgot your interest is in science, not history. And then she goes, okay, in a nutshell, which is never the correct way to describe any of this situation. And here's her explanation. Centuries ago, Spanish missionaries converted the Irish population from paganism to Catholicism. So England, afraid that Spain would use Ireland as a base for invasion, colonized Northern Ireland with Protestants. Ever since then, the Republic of Ireland has tried to unify the country by taking over Northern Ireland, which resists and is backed by England, protecting its interests there. And then Peter's like, oh my god, you mean? Yes, Peter, that's right. That's why innocent people are being killed every day, because of a threat that hasn't existed for hundreds of years.
Welcome to the real world, Pete.
At that point, you are just flummoxed. You're just, your mouth is open. Even if you're an Irish child, just like, that's not the history my teachers told me. And if you're an adult, you're joining the IRA at that point. That description there has zero to do with the Northern Ireland situation. Zero. So to counteract the fake news that Joy here is indulging in, here's what actually happened.
I'll live up!
now you're really invested in this story because you're like, how will these Irish, Spanish terrorists do this? How will they ever blow up Parliament and defeat Spider-Man? Spider-Man is still here, by the way. You know, he doesn't just go, this is outside of my jurisdiction. It's an international affair. I'm just here to listen to Margaret Thatcher for some reason, and then I'm going back home. But he doesn't do that, because we cut then to him in his hotel room. We see a lovely, you know, a dark blanket of evening over night-lit London. It looks like it's on fire here, but like, whatever. Peter's obviously going through it. This is a guy who's been to space, by the way. He's seen people erased from time, blown apart, former friends attacking him, becoming rogue, but he's having trouble sleeping here because of what happened in the airport. So you kind of go, okay, whatever. The IRA are worse than Thanos, apparently. The comic has a message it wants to tell, very specific message about Spanish Irish terrorists, but whatever. So off he goes to a fancy restaurant, and we see some sort of little, you know, romance developing between the two. You're in the same hotel? We're having a good time? Maybe. But no, Peter has to ruin it because he can't get over it. He can't get over what happened in the airport. So he watches TV, and the bastion of truthfulness appears on the screen, the BBC, the Bring Back Colonization Network. So we see some more information about the attack. We find out that 6-year-old girl, she's in critical condition in the hospital. And then Peter has a very American response to this, which is basically to say that I can't play policeman for the whole planet. It's not my responsibility, which would become the genesis of American foreign policy for the next 40 years, which is basically to play policeman for the entire planet. He decides, do you know what? I am just going to become policeman. And he decides, F it, I'm just going to go get my own answers. You know, I thought Joy's description of what was going on, as stupid as it was, you kind of think to yourself, that's centuries old issue. I can't solve that. But Peter Parker, being who he is, decides, I can fix that in the short amount of time I'm here. So off he goes. So he goes to prison, and the comic has another thing to say. It's been dropping social commentary all over the place. Might as well drop it here too. Cages where human animals pace and seed, and occasionally, like their woodland counterparts, howl at the moon. So everyone in prison is an animal. Doesn't matter what you did, you're still an animal. And a lot of these prisons would have been filled with Irish people. Up the rebels, and death to anyone who keep Ireland divided. Yes, it's an Irishman in prison, straight off the bat. And Spider-Man basically breaks into the cell, interrogates this guy. He's like, you know, I'm your worst nightmare, mister. And he's wearing the black suit, so he's black suit Spider-Man, so he's been to space at this point. That suit will eventually go on to become Venom. So maybe we can give Spider-Man a bit of benefit of the doubt. Maybe he's not an actual arsehole here. Maybe it's the suit. Who knows? This guy in prison is having none of it. You know, he thinks it's a banshee. If I was part of a worldwide terrorist organization, which the IRA kind of were at this point, if I was a member of that, I would kind of be up to, you know, I'd keep abreast of who my enemies would be. Okay, that's Spider-Man, that's Captain America, that's the X-Men. But this guy doesn't know Spider-Man because he's a dumb Irish guy. He just thinks it's the banshee. Spider-Man uses that to his advantage, gets information. Now there is this other plot that is sort of going on in the background, and it does sort of conclude the overall story eventually. Just as a sort of a pin in our story here, we see the name Roxxon. That's going to become very important, but basically Joy is just getting a little bit of information here to say, hey look, it's not quite as simple as a load of IRA men just attacking the airport. It might be something a little bit more here than just what appears on the surface. Now, Spider-Man takes the information he gets from our prison friend and basically breaks into this warehouse type place. And he sees the rest of the guys, the IRA lads, you know, they're having the bands, they're having the party. They're talking about Ireland, you know, being united, fighting Tada death, okay? But then we see something a little bit different here. We see, and fair the red hand. And Spider-Man's like, red hand? And as a reader, as an Irish reader, you're like, red hand? And you're thinking back to your history and you're like, what other thing from our history are they using now to beat us over the head with? So you don't find out too much here at the moment, but you do find out their plan, which is basically shake the British government to its very foundation. if they're not going to get out of a country, will turn their country into a living hell. There's a bit of a kerfuffle outside. Spider-Man, it turns out, has brought the police here accidentally. They start firing on them, you know, MI5, the crack anti-terror groups, you know, they're like, so even the IRA are like, you know, in awe of the British security forces here. So a fight does ensue between the Brits, as they're known, and the IRA here. Because of Spider-Man, people die. The building goes up in flames. So, you know, fast forward, we do get to Margaret Thatcher's, you know, great speech. Spider-Man's starting to piece things together. He's kind of saying to himself, I don't see how they're going to attack. I don't understand how they can do this with all the security around. And then it finally hits him. He's like, shake the foundations. They're down in the sewers. And that brings us back nicely to the beginning of this video, which is basically the lads in the IRA hooking up explosives underneath Parliament when, you know, Orange Order suited Spider-Man decides to jump down into the sewers. So you have the usual diddly Irish language, you know, saints alive, what the devil, you know, they think it's the devil. A lot of stupidity going on around down here, Three Stooges-esque grabbing for the detonator, the bombs. These are explosive experts, but the comic will want you to fear them and laugh at them at the same time. Sean Dunn and the boys, they're scrambling around the place. Sean's like, well, look, if the explosives aren't going to go off, then a grenade will go off and will blow up the explosives without the detonator. And then Spider-Man's like, Dunn, don't be a fool. I'm no fool. I'm an Irishman. And unfortunately, that is his last words because he blows up with the tunnel. So yeah, Spider-Man gets another person killed, but he does save Parliament. So that's good in some respect, I suppose. Outside, we see Peter again. He switches back to his Peter Parker mode. You know, hey, what's going on? Blah, 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 doing his usual shtick. It's a good thing the Provos were so clumsy with explosives. A second time, this could have been, wait, they're wheeling out the head man. And then we see Sean Dunn, who half alive. You know, he's lost an arm and an eye. He's all tore up inside. He's sort of muttering, up the rebels. You know, it's like, where is this going? And then Joy's like, it doesn't end here. We've just scratched the surface, but to dig further, we have to go to Ireland.
Go to fucking Spain instead.
Like, why are you bothering us? I mean, she had sort of earmarked earlier that it was a Spanish problem. Spain sent the terrorists, like, you know, source Joy. She's like, I need to know more about this Red Hand. And that's enough for Peter Parker to go, I hear Dublin's real nice this time of year. And there's a little bit of sass in that, a little bit of a threat. Is Spider-Man looking at what happened here and thinking, you know who's going to get it? Ireland. That's how this particular issue ends. Okay, it's done. It's over. Irishmen have died at Spider-Man's hand. The matter is wrapped up. We lost some people, but it's over. Now, the issue that follows that, it's basically a sort of a flashback or a reminiscence type issue. So yeah, they're on a ferry boat from Liverpool to Dublin. So Peter is still, you know, his mind is set. I mean, look at that face. He is dead set on doing what the British did not do, which is to colonize the rest of Ireland. So he is locked in, baby. He has a cold. He's a little bit out of sorts. Not the type of superhero you want in your own country, out of his mind, with a bit of a vendetta. But the end of the issue is where we pick up again with Peter, you know, in Ireland. And there we go, look. And it's great to see the Irish skyline there. There's like 2 Eiffel Towers, what looks like a cathedral in the back. Beautiful, just as I remember it. So yeah, look, he docks in Dublin, off to the countryside. They're on the way to Belfast. So the bit in Ireland is cut out. Like, you could just imagine him just as it's pulling to dock. He's there like cracking his fingers. He's like, right, I'm here now. And then just wipes out Dublin. And then rents a car. And then wipes out everyone else on the way. At one point, Spider-Man says, it's hard to believe such a beautiful place could be the site for so much destruction. Which, at this point, I'm taking as a threat. And then Joy, you know, good old Joy, she chimes in here at the end, and you know, she has to get another dig in, and she tells Peter, where we're going, Belfast is hard to take. Prophet of Doom. I kind of think, okay. It's a long drive to Belfast, but it's a bit of a severe right turn they took there. You sure this is Belfast, Joy? It looks more like Berlin during World War II. He's just like, what happened here? You know, I know the troubles in the north were bad, but they weren't this bad. What did you use as a frame of reference? Gaza? Now, Peter's still doing his pity party thing as he's going on. You know, he's bemoaning how much he hates profiting off people's grief. Blah, blah, blah. I'm a reporter. Crying as he's loading more film into the camera and beating up Irish people. Oh, why do I have to do this? Why? You know, you don't have to be here, Peter Parker from America. You don't have to be in Belfast. No one asked you to. The Margaret Thatcher thing is done. Why are you in Ireland? And then you're kind of thinking yourself, you know, you're an Irish person, you're thinking, okay, look, you beat us up in England, fair enough, like we shouldn't have been there, you know, whatever. But you come into our home and beat us up, Spider-Man. What the hell? Now, again, a bit of a history lesson. It might seem strange to see British security forces and British policemen here and think, oh, no, he's still fighting Irish people on English soil. Now, that's a loaded statement. I'm not going to try and break that down here in my Spider-Man IRA video. There's also Irish people living here. It is part of Ireland. It's called Northern Ireland, not far western Britain, you know? This is just crazy. I mean, look, here's pictures of Belfast during the Troubles, you know? Certainly not a great place to be, but this place, this was just mental. But anyway, Peter's yabbering on, and then you kind of, your worst fear as an Irish person, you're like, oh my God, the IRA are in this as well. Jeez, oh, there's, look. And you're kind of thinking, maybe it's just the shadows. Maybe they're not balaclavas. You're like, please don't be Irish people. Please don't be Irish people. Peter is just, he's completely oblivious, possible PTSD. He's like, call Spielberg. I'm ready for him to take up, you know, that job offer. We're caught in the middle of a firefight. I thought we left all this behind us in Beirut. But yeah, look, the IRA man decides to turn to the camera, so to speak, or turn to Joy and Peter. Peter's like, how do I insert myself again into this situation? So he uses his flash and his camera to daze this guy, who is then horrifically shot down in a hail of bullets. And then Peter's just like, oh, sorry, I didn't think that was going to happen. What did you think was going to happen? So yeah, look, we see other IRA people here. One of them is called Marty. Marty is the one on the ground there. We see a lot of what look like platform shoes, you know, Cuban heels, the usual attire of the IRA. However, I will say, those are not lore accurate IRA balaclavas. They look like they have ears. They look like they have Black Panther ears. It's quite possible that the Marvel could not get the rights to the IRA from the Irish Republican Army themselves. They were quite popular at the time. They were doing a lot of press tours. They were in high demand. Very possible that Marvel just couldn't secure the rights. Sorry, but we kind of come across as bad guys in this. Could you just not use the balaclava? Use a black sack, paper bag, whatever. So yeah, they're like your pound shop IRA, essentially, okay? The British come in here to save the day. They get their boot checked, searched, all's well and good. They asked them the question whether they were American because, you know, if the answer was Irish, they would have just been, you know, shot or beaten up on the spot. Peter Parker, you know, possibly mental deterioration, he's still making jokes. Now, there is something strange here. Maybe something happened between the other issue and this one. Maybe there was a phone call. Maybe even a little slight tap on the shoulder for whoever wrote this, because this time the IRA have been replaced with everyone's other favourite Irish villain, the Black Hood. So they're not the IRA then. We'll get there. Yeah, those are definitely bags. We can't carry any excess baggage, which just makes me really do think that they are bags on their head. Bagaclava? Is that a thing? Anyway, the IRA are thwarted by a camera flash, you know. That's all we need to know. Once again, Peter Parker inserts himself in the situation, gets Irish people killed. This time on their home turf. So yeah, now we see Belfast. Presumably, this Belfast is 100 miles away from the other Belfast. I mean, look at the difference. What part of Belfast is this that it looks perfect compared to the other part? Anyway, look, himself and Joy are back in the hotel room again. We get a bit more of an info dump here. The Red Hand is mentioned again. They're in London, but these Black Hoods are news to me. They're all linked. The IRA, the Black Hoods, the Red Hand, they're all part of this plot involving Roxxon. We then move to another part of Belfast. Again, we see bomb squad called, you know, the IRA's calling card. Peter's trying to get photographs, you know, desperately trying to insert himself again into the situation. Joy and Peter eventually bump into this young man who's tripped over on the pavement. He makes a run for it. They say, let's catch him. Now, this is where things get a little bit tricky, and I wonder, is the author of all this to blame? Well, he's definitely to blame, because I think there was some backtracking. I think maybe there was a bit of criticism on what was being done here. So they sort of introduce so many different splinter elements that when you go to try and point the finger at anyone, no one has their hand up. So they go into this sort of pub, and we see that the Black Hoods are they're not liked by the Irish people. And the Black Hoods, they're just killing and bombing Catholics, Protestants, police, soldiers, children. It doesn't make any difference to them. So they're not your traditional provisional IRA. They're almost a splinter group of the provisional IRA. And again, we have a really weird thing. So in the last issue, there was very little to zero sympathy for any sort of terrorist activities. But now we have the Provos are painted in a positive light in comparison to the Black Hoods. Joy says here, Joy, famously, who had no sympathy, says, this is really weird. These hoods aren't acting like ordinary terrorists at all. How would they profit from all this death and destruction? So we find out that there's a monetary incentive to their terrorism. Now, and bear with me, because when you get to the end of this issue, you'll find that although technically this is not the IRA, the repercussions for the people of Ireland are far greater had they been the real IRA. So in Rocks On, we find out that this guy here, Ian Forbes, has a bit of a plan. It's a comic book, so the plan involves some sort of deadly weapon. And the deadly weapon is, very easy to remember. AKX, anti-personal particle beam cannon, just rolls off the tongue. And it's designed and built by Roxxon for American military use. Very unusual that the Americans would be involved in any sort of military campaigns in countries that are not their own. But here we are. Now, the Pentagon did, however, cancel the contract, so they're looking for alternative methods to recover their research and development investments. Previously, the Middle East would have been the perfect place to put it up for bidding. Recently, however, Roxxon has had to shut down virtually all of its interest in that region. He didn't really need to worry too much about that because for the next 20 odd years, they will have their Middle East contracts back. So this guy here, Mr. Forbes, decides that actually England will be a perfect test bed for this weapon. He obviously wants to set in motion some sort of horrific incident that would force the English government to come to Roxxon and go, we need the best weapons in the world, we need a contract with you to build them. So they just need a sort of a false flag operation here, and I wonder, I wonder who's going to take the blame in that scenario. And we find out that the Black Hoods, the counterfeit terrorists, they create the perfect scenario of confusion and unrest. A reason to invade or to extend your military exercises in a particular region or country for some sort of a gain. And we see here that this guy here, Agent 003, Duncan O'Neill, he's going to be their man on the inside on the British government saying, hey, look, we need stronger policy here, more weapons, the usual shite. And then they're going to use the Black Hoods as a sort of, look at all the terrorist activity that's happening in this country. Look at what the Irish are doing to us. We need more weapons. We need to, what's the Israeli? We all know indirectly where that's going. Eventually they're going to say, do you know what? We already control the north of Ireland and that's not working out for us. So let's just do the rest of the country. That is the logical conclusion with what they're going for here. And Peter has a bit of a moment of realization here. He's like, don't you realize the bloodshed you'll cause in the name of profit? They get rescued by their friend from earlier. Spiderman comes back into play. He's starting to attack these Black Hoods, who mysteriously talking like Irish people, but they're not Irish people. They're not the IRA, remember? Again, they've never heard of Spider-Man. Very strange. Saints alive, he's still coming. You can't tell me. These are not the Irish people from the other issue. Anyway, he makes short work of them. So the Black Hood / IRA give up, and while all this battle is going on, Ian Forbes decides, I need to make a getaway here. But something horrific happens here. One of the Black Hoods is actually the brother of Liam here, our friend who rescued Peter and Joy. Now, this is another confusing part of the comic. Either they're counterfeit terrorists who don't believe in the cause of Irish unification, or they're the provisional IRA. And this panel here tells me that they're the provisional IRA. And Peter kind of says, well, at least the soldiers should find evidence of Forbes' scheme. And then Joy goes, probably. Although I doubt either Forbes or O'Neill will ever stand trial for any of this. They're too well connected. Who are they going to blame for this then? And then we see Peter doing his usual, I can't believe it. People got away with this. People are dead, blah, blah, blah. His usual sort of, he's either joking or taking the piss when Irish people are getting creamed out of it. And then he moves back into serious mode when it's British people who are getting hurt. If you're ever in doubt, though, that the Black Hoods were not the IRA, we see Liam here, who's basically like, Peter Parker goes, what about you, Liam? Don't you want to see them pay for what happened to your brother? And he goes, I don't know. Right now, I've had enough of killing and shooting. Cut to the helicopter from earlier exploding. Okay? You can't tell me that's not the IRA, okay? And that's it. The helicopter blows up. And, don't forget the last issue where it actually was the provisional IRA. And the Black Hoods here, Black Hood me whole. This is the IRA. I don't care how many phone calls they got off the boys in the IRA. It didn't stick. They're still trying to slip in the IRA here. So yeah, look, with the Heathrow bombings and now this particle cannon fiasco, Dublin's not looking great right now, let's just say. And yeah, look, you could go, they're just after the terrorists. We saw how well that went in Gaza. The IRA are currently living under hospitals in Dublin and Belfast. Yeah, no thanks, okay? I mean, I need closure. Did we get nuked by the Brits for being supervillains here? Spiderman, what have you done? Spiderman's just like, I can't believe so many people have died, blah, blah, blah. What's the point anymore? What about Ireland, Spiderman? Do you not care about what's going to happen to us? To put it in a current context, the IRA in America has pretty much the same standing as Israel do now. In other words, they could do no wrong. Sure, there was outward condemnation for the attacks in Britain, but there was no repercussion. There was no talks of America invading Ireland to help their closest ally. In fact, the Americans were heavily involved in a peace process, an actual peace process. It's funny how things work for one country and not for another. And in the midst of all that, you have these especially with Spider-Man, this very sort of weird, almost anti-IRA sentiment in it. Now, there is an anti-terrorist sentiment in it, which is perfectly fine, but it doesn't go that direction. In fact, when it does try and explain the situation in Ireland to perhaps garner some sympathy, it's a complete false history that's provided, and thus no sympathy can be garnered. If anything, the situation is made light of. Now, it is a fake situation, but it's also a stand-in for the actual situation, and thus, in the absence of the actual situation, the humour and lightness of the situation still exists. And this brings me to a very important point, which is the real world versus the Marvel world, and the confusing times the two are shoved together. The bleeding of the real world into the Marvel universe has always had a somewhat bizarre effect. The current Marvel universe, the 616 verse, is essentially our world, but with the Marvel characters within it. Thus, it has our history and timeline, but with slight alterations to allow for certain characters. The 9/11 attacks on New York also have a very odd effect on the Marvel universe. I think the comic book Moment of Silence is a very, very interesting lens on this issue I'm talking about. And in it, it deals with the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks on New York. We see the heroes at Ground Zero pulling survivors and digging people out of the rubble, and mostly just passing the glory onto the firefighters, the first responders of that day. However, what's very strange is that we also see the villains of the Marvel Universe at Ground Zero doing exactly the same thing. So you have Doctor Doom, Magneto, Kingpin, Juggernaut, they're all standing solemnly at Ground Zero, showing sorrow and even tears. Doctor Doom sheds a tear while looking over the wreckage. All of these villains combined have done 100 times more damage to not only New York but the world. And they've killed 10 times the amount of people that day. And they didn't care about it at all. So why now? Doctor Doom has leveled cities, ruled rogue nations, murdered without remorse. Magneto is consistently trying to do mass genocide against humanity. And Kingpin, out of everyone, would simply thrive. He's a corrupt individual. He would thrive off this incident in New York. And it brings us back to the idea of like Magneto. It's like that blurring of the lines. He hates all humanity, but why is he here in sorrow? And I think just like the IRA issue in Spider-Man, he's here with a very clear message that the people who did this to New York are worse than the villains in these fictional comic books, which relatively is not true at all. And thus it's always strange when real world events are forced to coexist with Marvel events. Magneto is a concentration camp survivor who is clearly broken from that experience, and it heavily informs how he sees the mutant situation in his world. He doesn't want to be close to that extermination ever again. It becomes an allegory for what Jewish people went through at that time. However, Magneto's gripe is with the world at large and humanity. At no point does Magneto go to war with the entirety of Germany, and not consistently throughout its run, or his run. Germany are no longer the bad guys anymore, and so it'd be very odd for Magneto to still continue to fight against them. Thus, by shifting the blame to humanity, the writers knew they could have endless storylines with Magneto as the bad guy, using his concentration camp experience to draw a battle line between humans and those who are deemed lesser than human. With Magneto as the bad guy and the rest of the world as the good guys, it's him versus us, black and white, good and evil. It's an allegory, a stand-in. But when you mention actual events like the IRA bombings and organizations like the IRA and other terrorist attacks from around the world, you then frame those attacks within the framework of supervillainy. And suddenly Magneto, who is deemed as sympathetic because he is a Holocaust survivor and terrorist, he then stands in line with ISIS and Al-Qaeda, who are also on missions against the rest of the world due to what they perceive also to be threats to their identity. Now that's not to compare one to the other, but the lines become fuzzy and downright messy when you blend the two worlds. The Iraq War is another weird issue thrown into the Marvel universe too. And Marvel Comics has addressed the Iraq War in several storylines. It spans such a long period of history that it's very hard to ignore it. Now sometimes this was done allegorically, but other times it wasn't, and the response was very mixed. You had some characters as serving in the conflict, others criticizing it, and many stories used the war to explore larger themes like trauma, military ethics, and national security. But still, it was very weird, and it's no different with the IRA and indeed Ireland. When you draw that line, you have to put the real world people on the same map. Are the IRA standing with Magneto and Thanos, or are they standing with the X-Men, an outcast good guy group? Or are they standing with the Avengers, an outright virtuous and publicly lauded group? It's tricky, isn't it? Because depending on who you are, as an Irish person, you would put them on the side of good. Even though they've done atrocities, you would still not put them in the same league as Magneto. However, an American writer might do that, or a British writer might do that. If the real world exists in this fantasy world, where do other groups stand too? Where do left-wing revolutionary groups stand? Are they good or are they bad during this period? What about Arabs and their right to defend themselves from Western invasion? Hamas, Iran, China. The lines are very blurry. Ireland is a very unique situation in the terrorist pantheon, let's just say. And I think every time the comic books try and go near it, it's very odd. The IRA were seen as heroes to many Irish people, especially those living in the north, and to have Spider-Man fight them in whatever guise, and to belittle their cause, he suddenly doesn't become the hero. It's the James Bond effect I talked about as to why the James Bond movies are never set in Ireland, or why the IRA are never the bad guys in those movies. Given the situation, it paints the heroic James Bond as a not so heroic figure. And that brings us perfectly to the IRA, who at that period of time, whether we want to admit to it or not, were the Al-Qaeda of the world to the British government. Now the interesting thing is that Spider-Man killed several IRA members here, And say what you will about the IRA, but that seems kinda weird for a guy who lets his own supervillains live for doing 10 times the damage and for no reason. By having heroes battle the IRA, it makes it somewhat strange then that the Irish fight for independence and freedom from oppression was somehow at odds with the rest of the world, or wrong. So wrong in fact that Spider-Man had to come over himself to solve it. And it sends a stark image and message to young readers across the world that are outside the Marvel Universe homeland, America. And that message is, watch yourself. Because it wasn't bad enough we sent our soldiers in to liberate you from the terror you're inflicting upon yourself. But watch yourself doubly now, because if you're really bad, we'll send in our superheroes too. The same dictum issued to any would-be attacker that comes up against our Marvel heroes. We have a Hulk, and we will use them.